What is going on there, Secondhand Talent family? It's your boy Steiner here, as always, with another episode of Secondhand Talent. We have drama teacher and so much more former actor, director, Fitch fan, moderator, and so many other things. Reed Meschefske here with us today on the show. Reed, thank you so much for being a part of the program.
Steiner, my friend, absolute pleasure being here. It's great.
We're incredibly happy to have you, and we're going to get into what Reed does in just a little bit. But first, we have to start out with the question we always start out with. Had you never heard the term secondhand talent before? What does that term mean to you?
It's funny. When I've listened to past episodes, I always had my own response, which I'll get to in a second. My response would be the first time I heard that question is the person who makes sure that the spotlight is where it's supposed to be. And then, ironically, I just a couple of days ago looked at your channel description, and that's exactly what
Huh.
your description is. I think because there's so many things that make an artistic or any sort of endeavor, nothing is done in a vacuum, and it's those people that help facilitate any sort of vision, any sort of project. It's all of those people that help put that together. So yeah, and the person who gets the spotlight where it needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, well, like you said, you pretty much nailed it. The spotlight metaphor is actually so it was inspired by two people, one you don't know and one you do. My dear friend Stan Pacinka, Stan, love you, buddy, and we grow and love Chris Kuroda. We shine the spotlight on the people who shine the spotlights. It was, when we started the show way back when. It's incredible. We're nearing the end of season 3 right now. But I
Congratulations again.
remember. Thank you so much. I remember in my interview with Ellis from Mockingbird Foundation, he had mentioned, Chris Kuroda as well was the type, when he would think of secondhand talent in that sense. And it's interesting because that really is who we, think of, I think, in the fish community as like the pinnacle of what it means to be not just adjacent to the band, but practically band member, even though you're not with it. And Chris really does this amazing job of keeping that momentum flowing through the show. So that really harkens back kind of to what you said there. Yeah. It's it's a pleasure having you on, and one of the reasons well, there's several reasons that I'm happier on this show, but I'd like to start by jumping into the education aspect. We'll get to fish in a little bit, but you are a drama teacher, and how long have you been teaching for?
I've been teaching off and on going back to the early 90s, full time as a high school educator. I've done it for 16 years. I did 3 years at a school in Northern Virginia, and then the recession hit, and there was the tier of the certification stuff happened. So I found myself out of a job, and I debated going back to theater, moving back to Chicago or to New York. And I decided that I wasn't quite done. I hadn't quite scratched the itch with teaching. So I ended up taking a position here in Santa Fe. And I've been here for the last 13 years doing that. And I run the theater and film program here, direct all of the shows. And yeah, I love it. It's really great.
And what was it in your now? I'm a former teacher myself. I understand obviously, the urge, the itch to educate. But what was it that brought you into wanting to teach drama specifically, to be involved in
Well,
the arts?
what happened was there was a production with a major theater company in Chicago, and it was a major production. This would have been about early 2006, and I was a union actor, and I had a bunch of work lined up, and I, like every person in the city and across the country, was auditioning for this one particular show, and I just kept getting called back, and I would think I was on callback 4 or 5, and my drop dead date for a number of shows was about a week before, um, or excuse, yeah, about a week before when the casting for this show was going to happen.
Mm.
And I called the casting agent and kind of in theater double speak, I'm like, I'm considering dropping out of this show. Do you think this is a good idea? And he's like, of course, I can't say anything official, but yes, I think that's a good idea. So I thought I thought I was good to go. And so I dropped out of these other shows because this was a much bigger, higher profile production.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, I found out later I was the bubble boy. I was the last person to not get cast.
Oh
I
no.
was too tall. And so suddenly I found myself without any professional work. I was 9 months out of acting, no matter how it went. And
Right.
so I was talking to my neighbor. I was back up in Wisconsin. I was talking to my neighbor and her husband who live in Virginia. And he mentioned my story to one of his principals. And they're like, oh, this school needs a teacher. So they literally, I didn't even apply. They called me and said, can you please
Hmm.
apply? Would you be interested in doing this? I'm like, I've got no formal experience. I'm not certified. But they flew me out and they offered me the job on the spot. And so that's how I ended up being there for about 3 years. And yeah, so that was how I ended up becoming a full-time teacher.
I mean, it's so interesting to me how so many of the stories that come on, it doesn't matter what occupation or space the guest comes from, like how many occasions of happenstance there are that come across this show of kind of like, well, I was planning on doing one thing or I had my sights set on something else, and like stars that I weren't even looking at align to make this opportunity, you know, come manifest. That's, I mean, I just, it's a great lesson in that, we talk a lot in life, I guess, about, the door closing, but looking for a window opening. Like there's always a window opening somewhere, even if you think that person's losing around you. So being aware that those other opportunities are there and just being willing to say yes and going with that.
Yeah, you're right. And when I talk to my students, I've had this conversation with other friends where my question is always, do you want to be an actor or do you want to work in theater? And for me,
Mm,
it's always been theater is it's what I was put on the planet to do. I've been at all different levels, every position you can name. I've probably gotten a paycheck for it. And I just love being involved with whether it's on stage, pushing buttons, programming lights, hanging lights, or teaching it, whatever it is. I've always known that I wanted to get paid and to make a living doing theater, and it comes across in different ways, in different forms, and I love it. And there's never a dull day.
and when you came into the industry, I think that's a great point about learning all parts of it, and wanting to be an actor versus in theater. I think that's an excellent demarcation there. We had an interview early this season with audio engineer Bob Dorr, and one of the things he talked about was when he was brought into the industry, one of the best pieces of advice that he had gotten was learn the whole animal. Learn every part of the industry, learn how to run sound, learn how to rig cables, learn how to, operate basic, video tech equipment. Just learn everything. Because if do you want to be a guitarist or do you want to be in music? Right? Because
I
if
learned
you
that
want to,
lesson. Yeah, I
right,
learned
well,
that lesson from my drama teacher in junior high was Marianne Aschenbrenner. God love her, still a very dear friend, and she taught me that. But one also important thing to add on to that is know when to ask the questions,
ooh,
because
yes.
when you can sit and go, you know what, I don't know this, or this person knows more than I do about this, and I want to learn it, and I still 40 some years into this, I still enjoy picking up those new skills and those new traits. And that's an important thing. Sometimes people disregard that because they want to act like they know or have done everything. And in reality, there's always going to be a bigger fish. Another thing is I love seeing creative people execute challenging and interesting concepts, whether they work for you or they don't. I want to see them. I like seeing them take those risks. I love from minute one. I love Sci-Fi Soldier. I know that that's not as hot, and I think it's getting some revisionist history now where people are starting to
Yeah.
see. But I loved that show the minute that it happened, and I can see why people didn't. But I found that one, one of my favorite Halloween shows I've attended, and I enjoy seeing those guys have an idea, have enough money to execute it, and then to see it happen.
And I think, it's interesting that, you mentioned, my mother always said, my favorite kind of history is revisionist. And it's interesting to hear you say that, because as you were talking about the sci-fi set, I was thinking about the Cosmo and Vox set. And at the time, people were like, bright white light shining right between my eyes. And now, at the United Center this past October, when they brought out Everything is Hollow, people lost their minds. And the Jones Beach, Don't Doubt Me. I thought, it's like an incredible example of the way they're bringing some of those back. And I also think it's really interesting how those reactions start versus how they age. Because, we get the initial, like, this is different, it's weird, it's not fish. But like when you look at it in the grand scope of the tradition of Halloween costumes, the whole idea of the musical costume is that it's not fish.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Quadrophenia. Like they staged that show as the album, as the performance that it is. Quadrophenia is a theatrical album. It's an album that begets that, it's not the same as uh when they did the Talking Heads album, right?
No,
Like it's
Quadrophenia, the Who love that. You've got
yeah.
Tommy, obviously the quintessential rock opera. Yeah, 100%.
And when I think of Fish, I've been, as you've been saying this, I've never hit any element of the trifecta. I've never seen a show in Vegas. I've never been to Halloween. I've never been to a New Year's show, and I've never been to a show at Madison Square Garden.
Mm.
Those are the three things that I haven't done. So I've never personally experienced, the costume, so to speak. However, yeah, it's hard for me to point to my favorite fish show. I know we all have moments and everybody could argue for this or that. But one of my favorite, I think, as you put it before, one of my favorite musical experiences of all time. And I really believe this was part theater. I don't consider this a concert as much. I was fortunate enough in 2019 to see Ghosts of the Forest.
Very cool.
And I appreciate that Fish plays some of those songs like Beneath the Sea of Stars and Ruby Waves and all that, but I remember I saw them at the Anthem in DC, and it was right after my brother's wedding, and I was on, I think, on a 6-day trip in America, in like 4 different states, and I was not feeling well. I was like, I need to make it to this show. I need to make it to this show. I hadn't felt like that in a very long time about anything. Certainly not about Tab or Mike Gordon band. I'm really not even about Fish, but something was telling me like you need to be at this show. And I wouldn't, even though there was no, acting or performers per se, that was not a concert. That was an experience like that, different than any. And this is where, to me, Trey's theatrical prowess shined, in that the venue was constructed in such a way that it was like you were in a set.
Mm-hmm.
It was almost like walking into the fishbowl, and you were just transported into the forest.
No, you're. I've heard a lot of people say that. I did not see Ghost of the Forest, which really bums me out. It's one of the downsides of living where I live. Is it's really far away from a lot of stuff. So, but Aristotle, you've got sight, spectacle, catharsis. Those are all key elements of the theatrical process. as defined, in poetics. And Trey is hyper aware of that. And we all talk about concerts are like they are a theatrical experience. You have your audience, and you have the sight, the spectacle, you have, hopefully at the end of it, catharsis and some sort of growth, whether it's just an enjoyable night out. That's an acceptable form of theatrical entertainment. And what do musicians do with their instruments? They play them. What do actors do on stage? They perform a play. What do kids do when they are 8? They play. This is not a coincidence that all of these words are the exact same thing. And what we get out of them is the same thing as well.
I think one of the things that it's extraordinarily well put, and just building on that, one of the things that creates that catharsis, and why I think that that applies so deeply to fish, is that they have this aspect of, obviously, fish has the thing. It's like we don't know what's going to happen at any given show, but they also have hints of expectation where, night one of a 3-night run, they'll play Tweezer. And the longer they go without playing the reprise, the
Mm-hmm.
greater the tension is towards that release.
Buddy, that
And
was one of the most special things about Baker's Dozen. And those are the only 3 shows I've ever seen at MSG, were the last 3 nights of Baker's Dozen. And knowing that, and
right.
the sense of anticipation, it's the same as Macbeth, and Burnham Wood. We knew how this was going to end, but that didn't diminish the impact
Mm.
that song has. It actually becomes part of its impact.
The reason I bring that up as my example, so when I was living abroad, is really when you and I really connected via
Mm-hmm.
.NET, was when I was living overseas. I only caught 3 shows in that time span. It was Alpharetta 2018, and I'll never forget it. I was with eTora on fish.net,
Yeah, great guy.
and my brother Benjamin, and they played Tweezer night one, and opened the show with "You Sexy Thing," and like it was just like all sorts of wildness. And we got to the venue night 3, and they opened the third show with the reprise, and everybody was just like, like everything like that, like any sort of somewhat preconception of anything we thought the show might be like, they immediately kicked it out the door. And that's like, again, similar to, Macbeth happens to be my favorite Shakespeare play. But similar to that, right? Even if it's coming at some point, how it happens, when it happens, why it happens, all of these things feed into, I think, another very valid element of a theatrical performance, which is that it's dynamic. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned the relationship with the audience and the actors. I'm very curious to hear your perspective on this, because I really only know this a little bit as a musician, mostly as a comedian. But as an actor, as a theater actor, how does it like how do you read the room, and how does that impact your performance? Because as you think about it, let me like fill this in for
Yeah, no,
our
that's good.
listeners. Well, I was just gonna say, like for comedians, for example, well, read the room is a big phrase that gets thrown around, and adjusting yourself. And I know, we could talk for days about how fish will respond in their playing to the mood in the room. Very curious to hear your perspective from the theater angle, what
Well,
that
I
call.
mean, yeah, at a professional level, like when you're doing, union work, when you're at that level, no matter what, you should be, you're trained to the point that you should be giving a consistent performance that is what the stage manager and the director are expecting. So the audience should always, it's not like when you were in high school and, you were feeling it, opening night was incredible and then Friday was kind of a dip, and oh, let's blame it on the audience. At a professional level, you are hopefully always giving a 95% performance. Those special nights, it's ephemeral because ideally when you're on stage, you don't you shouldn't be you should be keyed into the moments and existing on stage in as realistic and as uh, in the moment as you can possibly be. And so you're hopefully not sitting there thinking about, "Ooh, I can feel the audience." But
Hmm.
you know when they laugh, you know you can sense what that particular silence feels. You can just inherently feel it. And so it's oftentimes it's just one of those things, you're cooking with gas and you get off stage and you go, okay, that was a really special one tonight. Now, as a director, I can feel that energy. The audience understands energy, and I can look at a cast and I can go an hour before a show, tonight's going to be off.
Mm.
And it will, and it's just I don't know if there's something that I can pin it on, but there's a feeling. And what's the difference between this one jam versus this other jam? There is a special sauce that is in there that just makes it kick.
Well, so I think I can maybe point a little bit to where that feeling comes from, just based on my own experience. So the biggest difference in my opinion between a band versus an acting group, a group of actors on a stage reading a room, is that there's more than one person.
Mm-hmm.
And in in a band, there's a little bit more wiggle room for improvisation, but like you said, with a play, with a dramatic performance, a theatrical performance, with a script and cues, there's very little wiggle room for free improv, so to speak. And when I'm on stage and I'm, reading room, I have a lot more malleability in my time to be able to shift topics, to be able to really kind of feel that push pull ebb back and forth, as opposed to, even if you're feeling like it's a real hot night, you're working in tandem with the group, and the decisions that you make musically, vocally, are going to affect not just how the audience perceives it, but it's going to affect the rest of the cast. And there's sort of a bigger ripple effect that exists there that doesn't exist in stand-up comedy.
Yeah, more improvisation. I did professional improv, with comedy sports and theater sports back in the '90s, and yeah, you can feel it, and it's a really hard thing because once you're aware of it, you don't want to burst that bubble. You just kind of have to
Gotta
ride with it.
tread lightly.
Yeah, and
Well,
so I mean, it's a skill, as Fishman says, it's a special night when the drool comes. So and so you let it ride your wave. It's that ephemeral element of performance that is both really exciting and really terrifying at the same time, and is ultimately so satisfying. Is when you do tread that. You and I have seen, probably between the two of us, over 1,000 concerts, and then
yeah,
there's
yeah.
you can name those 12 or 13 that were just stratospheric in
Without a
their
doubt.
impact, where it's just like, was this concert any better than this? I don't know. Doesn't invalidate it, doesn't make it
Right.
bad, but there is it's yeah.
There's a line between, an experience. I would say that the way I would put it would be like it's the line between an experience versus a formative experience.
Yeah,
There's
100%.
certainly plays that I can think of as well that I've seen, where I've had like oh, I forget the name of the play, but it was the story of the Temptations. um
Oh,
I
yeah. Oh, it's right on the tip of my, yeah. Keep on going.
it's the story of the Temptations, and it was me and my all my siblings were sitting there watching this play, and the whole time we were just confused because we thought they were singing to a CD. We were looking all over the theater for the band, could not find the band. Like, could not find the band. The
Ain't too
intermission
proud.
came.
Ain't too proud.
Ain't too
Yeah.
proud. That was it. Ain't too proud. We saw it. Thanks, Grandma, again for sending us to that show. So my siblings and I went to go see Ain't Too Proud on Broadway, and we were looking around the entire show because the music, I mean, whole like they opened that show with how sweet it is. Like it was magical. And they came out, for the encore. Um, the back of the stage lifted up. The band was back there, and my siblings and I, like, it's all these like older people at my siblings and I are up going, and like all these people are looking like what, and you could see in the eyes of everybody in the band, they were so happy that there was somebody just like who was like, oh yeah, no, 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 we got it today. Like
No,
you.
no, and it's this weird thing with theater, maybe not as much with music theater, but I still think that that's the case, that that there's some sort of cachet that comes with it, that there's an expectation that it's going to be life defining, or there's a cultural heaviness
Mm,
that comes with,
mm,
no one goes to it. We do, and we know it's possible to go to a musical event, a concert. My wife doesn't feel this way, where she wants to go to a music event, hear songs that she likes, dance, have a drink, and go home. We realize the power of concert and that it can be life changing. However, when my wife or people go to see a play, there's an element of there's an expectation of something more, so or and that's, while that certainly can be true, it's also that can sometimes be it can it can be to the detriment of the art form, because theater is a common person's art form, going
mm.
back to the Greeks,
Yes.
going back to in quote unquote non-Western traditions, it's part of the tribe. It's a form of expression, joy, celebration, worship, and
Politics. I mean, if you
politics.
go back to
And
the oh,
yeah, and so that element, and that's one of the reasons that I love the theatricality of Fish so much, is that it doesn't take itself seriously, while at the same time
mm,
being incredibly, incredibly gorgeous. I go back to the petrichor, or the hourglass. That image is so powerful, and the jam was
yes.
incredible, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, but then look at the theatricality of it and the power of that petrichor event was so special to me, because, and I wasn't there live, just because of the power of the imagery, and the how that imagery was both silly and beautiful at the exact same time. And that's what all good theater should be. I always say, make them laugh for 98 pages, and if you can make them cry for the last two, they're going to remember the show forever.
Yeah.
And that's the power of it.
And I think one of the real magic things about Fish, you know, theater, the strive for theater, I've always felt that the best plays are the ones with the simplest sets, because it really requires the actor to actors and actresses to bring out the life of the words that are coming on the screen. And it's one thing to write a rock riff, right? It's another thing to write a song like Petrichor, where you have, you know, this song in segments and movements and all
Time
these
turns
different.
elastic.
Time Turns Elastic is a
and
phenomenal
and what
example.
the Fish fandom has done, and to the reaction to that song, that is one of the most glorious pieces of structured music Trey has ever done. I did not get to hear it when it was performed live, uh and sure, maybe it was a quote unquote show killer, but it's operatic, and much more than a rock song.
My second show, I got to see Time Turns Elastic, and it changed that my second show changed, like made me a Fish fan. That's when I got it. Like was the Cross-Eyed and Painless from the second set. Get I mean Avena.
What show was this?
So my very first shows were Alpine 2009.
Okay.
And night two, I barely remember night one, but night two, it opened up with Brother and the Wolfman's Brother.
Nice.
Wolfman's Brother, by the way, is the first Fish song I had ever heard. And then they played Avinu Malkeinu.
That's
And
a good one.
yeah, but you have to remember this is, 18-year-old Steiner who's from Chicago, standing in the middle of Wisconsin with 25,000 people singing Avinu Malkeinu. I was very confused.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the I took a long break from Fish from 2003 to 2012. So the Time Turns Elastic, I was not back to the band.
You just missed it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of out of rotation.
So well, I was just gonna say, so at the end of this first set, they started playing Time Turns Elastic, and I remember it getting to the end at do, 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 and they played it, and the music just stopped, and everybody was like, "Ah, that sucked." And I was standing there going like that was magic.
Yeah.
Like
And
like movements in a rock song? Like what?
yeah.
Like, and I knew nothing about the theatricality of Fish at the time. Like for me, it was just like, holy fuck, how am I the only one as impressed by this as like that I can see?
And obviously they're not the first people to do this. The prog rock movement, we mentioned the Who earlier, they're not the pioneers in that, but
Even Frank
they
Zappa, back
well,
in the
and
day.
I didn't come, so many people, you got your Dead Tapestry back there. I I didn't come to Fish through, like so many other people. I was a goth kid, and I was then in early '90s Britpop and rave guy. That's how I. And so those early days, like the Bauhaus, Bela Lugosi's Dead, or those Disintegration, the
Mm.
Cure, those huge sweeping aural soundscapes. And then still my favorite band of all time, The Verve. Long before the Bittersweet Symphony, their early stuff, the early '90s,
Yeah.
um, with like Gravity Grave, that was where I came in, and that introduced me. I mean, it was composed, but that introduced me to these aural, soundscape songs that really, really take you somewhere. And then
Mm.
somewhere in there as well, Pink Floyd, obviously. But I also got introduced to Zappa, and one of the reasons was because of things like Thingfish and Joe's Garage, which are theatrical experiences.
Yeah,
And
yes,
so, and
yes,
I mean,
yes.
the script for Thingfish is, people disagree about. I love Thingfish, but the libretto is written in the liner notes, and so
As same
then,
with Joe's Garage, absolutely.
yeah, and I had no desire. I had tickets, I had opportunities to see the Dead, but I never went. And then in college, hearing Contact, that
Mm.
that was what that was what introduced me to Fish. It was not through the
Mm.
jam elements. It was through well, I mean, Contact is an incredibly Zappa-esque theatrical song, and my mind just stopped. I remember where I was, and I remember going, "Who the hell is this? And what is this?" And I have now since come back and become a huge
Sure.
fan of the Dead and all of those things, obviously. But yeah, at the time, that's how I came to them, it was not because of the jams. It was because of those other elements.
That's fascinating to me because I have exactly the same story.
Wow.
I was not a Jam fan. I was interviewing my buddy Mello, also going to be a season 3 guest coming up in a few weeks, folks. And we were talking about how we each got into music, and I started out with 3 artists in my life. Uh, Hip hop as a genre. So Beastie Boys, I would say, would be the biggest
Oh yeah.
one, but also Eminem, Dr. Dre, like Tribe Called Quest. When I was a kid, I listened to hip hop, Weird Al, and Frank Zappa. Those were my, one size fits all apostrophe. Those were my like songs. Like when I was growing up, my mom would Father Vivian, Oblivion, my uncle was the drummer in the Dwarves.
Oh wow,
Uh,
I didn't know that.
yeah, I don't, so our theme song, Shoot the Cool,
Hmm.
is his song.
Yeah.
That's my uncle from his band Lonely Moans.
Okay.
So that was part of the Sub Pop Singles record club in 88 or 89.
That's very
Uh,
cool.
SP 46 in the club. But I grew up listening to Dinosaur Jr. from that side, Dinosaur Jr., Nirvana. I did not start listening to the Grateful Dead until I was in high school. Um, which is, given the what most people know me for Ween Fish and the Grateful Dead, but I talked about it in this interview with my buddy, and I was like, yeah, I never did listen to any of that until high school. That was not the music that I was brought up on. And what brought me into Fish, so like I mentioned just before, the first track that I heard was Wolfman's Brother. And the only reason I got into it is because I didn't know it was playing. I had one of those little iPods. One of my buddies preloaded a bunch of songs on it. And every time I saw it, I was like, this song looks like the name is stupid. And I would skip it. And then one day I was just walking around Memphis and I hear doo, doo, and then that. And I was like, "Ooh, this is cool." And I look at my iPhone and lo and behold, it's that stupid song that I had been writing off out of pocket for the last God knows how long. And I was like, oh God, what have I been missing? And then I realized, like, oh, Quadrophenia, oh, Talking Head, oh, like the White Album, like, oh my God, like what even? And then I found Gamehenge. And I am a writer. I'm a comedian, right? I am a writer. I love theater. I love, writing for film. I love writing for plays. I had never I remember listening to McGruff for the first time and then going into some of these early Facebook groups and seeing people like Mark Serlo and and Colleen Slesbeck, uh, uh, Matt Crocher and Jack Fires, translating these songs into imagery that I was seeing in my head. And it blew my mind that, because of course everybody interprets art in their own unique way, but the fact that the same art can evoke such a common reaction and response to me was one of the most incredible things in the world. That like
I'm real.
there's
Yeah.
almost this agreed upon zeitgeist of what this stuff means and what these things look like to the point where they can make physical representations of the characters in Gamehenge and everyone's looking around like, yep,
Yeah.
that's
And I'm
exactly what a
really
multi-beast
curious
is.
to see what they do with it. Well, I guess by the time this airs, this is old news. We'll have answers, but I'm really curious to see what they do with the sphere because I remember seeing an interview with the person who did the LEDs back in 2016, which I was fine with. They were cool, but you know how Trey really wants to avoid having imagery, concrete imagery with the music that is being played. Like, and I think might be misremembering this a little bit, but it's something like if we put a tree on these LEDs, then suddenly everybody goes, "Oh, this song is about trees." And letting and
Yes,
that's and what Chris does with his lights is incredible, but it is very bare bones. The intricacies are obviously huge and it's expensive and the moving, etc. But as far as the setup of the lights, it's pretty standard compared to a lot of other people. And one of the reasons is that then it allows you to have your imagery versus the person next to you, and you get to have your own visceral response to those jams or those songs. And I think that's a really smart thing to do, by Trey and by the band.
absolutely. And I think that that's really reflected when they do venues like Alpine Valley and Deer Creek that, aren't structurally strong enough to have Chris's full rig up there. nobody complains that it's a poor light show if not all the moving lights are, you know what I mean? Like
No,
it doesn't,
absolutely.
you give
I
the net.
prefer that. I My favorite light show that I ever saw him do was '96 Minneapolis. I prefer, and this is just me showing my age. I prefer the they're not analog. Well, I guess they are the analog light setups of the late '80s, as opposed to now with
Mm,
the LEDs. There's a softness, and there's the transitions between the lights. There's a beautiful glow to traditional lights of the 1990s, the old Source 4s, and those compared to the LEDs, which are obviously incredible. And I'm no way besmirching Chris Karuda or Fish's light show. It's incredible. And what he can do is utterly amazing. But there is a part of me that really, really misses the warmth of old Source 4s and fill lights.
it's one of the reasons I love those venues like Alpine and Deer Creek so much is because it does, even though I wasn't around for the shows in the late 80s, early 90s, it still has this like feeling of home, that
Oh, yeah.
in that sense.
My
The last piece I guess that I would like to really cover in the interview is because like let's be real, you've been written up for education. Like it's not like you're not, it's not like you're new on the scene with that. Like I would love to hear a bit about um not necessarily accolades, but like moments that you would reflect on where you feel like you made an impact and contributed towards, somebody somebody else who would maybe want to continue to carry down the traditions of music or of theater. If there's any examples like that that come to mind, and I would also love to take a minute just to talk about Mockingbird and some of this, like the golf tournament and stuff like that.
There was one time, and this was pretty early in my career. Um, there was one time I was teaching out. This was back when I was still in Virginia, and there was a student that I had cast in a pretty sizable role, and he was talented, a little bit awkward, a little bit shy. Loved him, and he was really resistant to this. And I was like, you auditioned, you had the best audition. This is something that you want.
Yeah.
And his dad called me and said, "Can we all meet? I'd like to have dinner because he's having a hard time with this." And so we had dinner, and I just looked. I said, "Ultimately, this is up to you. If you want to back out, that's fine. But quitting is a hard thing to quit. And
Mm,
and if you face this, I've got you. I trust you. I know you're going to be incredible, and I got you. But it's your decision." And ultimately, he didn't. And he did the role. He ended up being nominated for an award, the high school theater equivalent to the Oscars or the Tonys out on the
all
East
right.
Coast. And and it was incredible. And his dad called me again and said, "I'd like to meet with you just one on one." And and he said, "Thank you. I need to explain this to you. He was born, he had lost oxygen to his brain for a little bit. And
Mm,
when he was born, the doctor said he's not going to be able to remember things. He's going to not have social groups of his own age. He will be somewhat limited and challenged." And I didn't know any of this, obviously.
yeah. I
And he
mean, yeah.
said, by casting him in this role and by believing in him, this challenge that he had faced and that he had known about his entire life, he overcame almost every single warning that the doctor had told us 15 years earlier. And I obviously didn't know any of that. He is now a professional actor and voiceover artist. He has accomplished all of these things that he had been told that he wouldn't be able to do. And I'm still friends with his family. I'm still friends with him. That's one that I'm incredibly proud of, because it was just one of those moments that you as a teacher, you don't know what's happening behind the scenes. Um, all you can do is be supportive and challenging, and and just be there for them. And then you realize that, inadvertently you've had this impact, and so that I was pretty proud of that one.
I think the key word there, inadvertently. Life isn't a movie, right? Those moments don't just like you we those don't get scripted.
Yep.
Those are and kind of tying it into the discussion about fish, one of the things I've always found the most magical thing about fish, which does make it theatrical in this aspect, is that they have a knack of creating all of the elements necessary to produce those moments. They don't make the moments themselves. We're the ones that make the moments by
Mhm.
being there and participating in this act that's taking place. But unlike almost any other music act I've ever experienced, Fish provides a space to find those moments that you may not be able to find in other places in life. The way I describe it to my friends who haven't seen them, they're like, how do you know they're gonna, play what you want to hear? And then my response is always the same, is that Fish has this knack of playing everything you didn't know you needed to hear.
Yeah,
And
and yeah, and also being able to recognize when it's just a concert, and when it's, if you're going in trying to have some life affirming experience every single show, you're going to be let down.
mm, yes,
But sometimes a show is just a show, and that's okay as well. That's part of the experience.
I fully agree. I mean, the lyric that comes to mind for me, it's not even a Fish one, but once in a while you get shown the light in the strangest of places if you look at it right. And
There
there's
you go.
there's two parts of that. You can get shown the light, and if you look at it right, both of those things need to happen. You need to be there ready to look, but you're also not going to see, it's got to get shown to you. You're not going to
Yep.
be able to manufacture that feeling. It's got to be something that, you know, you are in this space, which makes it conducive, for those types of things to happen. And being in a concert setting and being in a classroom setting, I feel like are both two unique spaces that foster those moments.
Yeah, and an important thing, with education is having the relationship be strong enough to also recognize when things aren't going well,
Mm,
or when someone's feelings were hurt, either on my end where I inadvertently make a joke or give a note and someone's feelings are hurt on their end, or when they do something to me. I love my kids, and they are, they're my kids, and the communication, the dialogue is so essential to foster that environment of safety and to foster that environment of trust and creativity. It's really important.
absolutely. And I know we're running out of time for today's episode, but before we do go, I'd just love to talk a little bit about some of the work you've done with Mockingbird.
Yeah,
As I
absolutely.
as I mentioned at the top of the show, and as we interviewed towards the end of season two, Mockingbird is a charity that provides grants for musical education throughout all 50 states. I have friends personally that have benefited from Mockingbird grants in the state of Illinois and really all
Great.
over the country. And it was an absolute honor and pleasure to interview Alice Goddard, the executive director of Mockingbird Foundation. And in our discussion, we mentioned some of your involvement in
Yep.
in the golf tournament and in other ways.
Yeah, I got invited to join the board in 2018, 2019. And it's just an absolute honor to be involved with them, to work on that. I've been involved with a lot of the stuff on the events, and people can go and donate. We've donated over $2 million to recipients all across the country. Every state has been donated to. We have standard grants for music education, where people just apply and say we need instruments or whatnot. We also have tour grants where the areas that Fish is touring will benefit. So, East Troy High School when they play Alpine Valley. We also do emergency grants when there are tragedies, where a music program might have lost their entire band because of a flood, or things like that. And it's entirely fan run, which is amazing. It's entirely volunteer. It's really kind of stands alone in nonprofits, especially for the longevity of it. It's really unique. It was born out of, and Ellis explained that eloquently in the interview that you gave him. But it was born out of the parking lot, trying to chronicle the music of Fish, and Fish was supportive as long as no one made any money, and here we are. And one of the things I'm most proud of since I've been involved is I was one of the producers for the Mockingbird sessions right there, which was a virtual weekend long, 3 day long event, celebrating the anniversary of the Mockingbird Foundation. And if you want some incredible music or incredible interviews, Charlie Dirksen has a taping history interview that chronicles the history of the bootlegs back in the 90s. We have everything from, members of the Yonder Mountain, Paul Hoffman, or P. Hoff from Green Sky. There's just an incredible amount of awesome music on YouTube where you can go and you can check out the Mockingbird Foundation's site, and we have all of that music available. You can make donations through that, and also listen to just some incredible music. Neighbor, when I first got introduced to Neighbor, they kind of had one of their first coming out parties was with us. It was a really, really, really special kind of thing to put on and to promote. We do the golf tournaments, which are always a lot of fun. I've hosted .NET meetups where members of the board can meet each other face to face. And yeah, it's a really special thing to be proud of, and something that I'm or be a part of, and that I'm something that I'm incredibly proud of being in.
It's for me, on top of everything you just listed, one of the most significant roles that fish.net, which is so first of all, ember.org, link in the comments. Go check out Mockingbird's site, see out ways to get involved or anything like that, just to read up about what they do. Fish.net, it's so many things. It's a forum, it's a database, it's a logbook for songs, it's a show tracker. It's just some incredible people who keep that running, and just make it work. Hats off, kudos to the whole fish.net team, kudos to the whole Mockingbird team, for keeping everything running. The biggest role that it played in my life is actually why we're having this interview, and that when I was living overseas, the fish.net forum was the way that I kept connected
Mm-hmm.
to my fellow fans of one of my favorite bands, and people such as Reed, people like Ellis. I've met so many wonderful, incredible people through the fish.net board, and have been able to participate in so many community events and do so much to support Mockingbird. It really is just an incredible place, and like Reed just said, it really does stand alone. There's nothing else quite like it, and go check it out, get involved.
Yeah, it's as with anything with Fish or anything, you get out what you put into it. If you come with an open heart, and kindness and all of that, it's really great, and it's just a fun place to spend some time and learn about the band and whatnot.
Absolutely. Well, Reed, thank you so much for being on the show. It was such a pleasure having you. And this has been Steiner with another episode of Secondhand Talent, and we'll see y'all next Wednesday.
Thanks, buddy. We'll talk to you later.
And that's a podcast. All right, and we're it. That's it. We're
That's
good. We
it.
did it. We
Great.
did
I
it.
hope that I
Yeah,
hope that works out.
that was amazing.